aren't just people that physically are on the earth, they are the people that dwell on the earth. They're the losers. First beast before causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. There's that identity thing again on the wound. And deceiveth all them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do in the sight of the first beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. Notice how many times this head wound is alluded to, 3 times here in the passage so far, as an identity thing with him somehow. Had wound by the sword and did live. And he had the power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell save he that had a mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. People who know nothing else about the Bible all know about the 666. This is where it comes from, verse 18 of chapter 13. And that leads to all kinds of conjectures. Now the 666, the word Christos in the Greek consists of 2 letters that start and end that word. And you put a serpent between these 2, and you get, in the Greek gematria, 600 plus 60 plus 6, or the 666, derives from the numerical value of those 3 letters, and are so rendered. But that, of course, is the Antichrist, a type of the Antichrist. So you take the first and last letters and put the serpent in the middle of it, and you get the Antichrist, or pseudo-Christ, to be more precise. But whose number? You know, you find books spending all their time on barcodes, you know, because the barcodes use a 6 as a separator symbol in some of them, not all, but some of them. There are insertable chips that where you can take a tiny thing and insert it under the skin and have it transpond information and so forth. There are all these technologies which indeed can be useful in protecting a person's identity, to avoid identity theft, and that's becoming an increasing concern in our modern culture. But that's not what it's talking about. Clearly, these technologies permit a dictator incredible power. That's not the point. They overlook that it is his number, not ours, that's the issue. It's not your PIN number or whatever, or Social Security number, that's the issue. It's his number that you take visibly as a sign of allegiance to him. Now, you may need to do that in order to get a identity that you need. I realize his control, that's going to be very effective. But the point is, it's his number and name that is the critical identity. So take whatever credit cards you've got or whatever other things, that's not the issue. But if you pledge allegiance to this leader by taking on his identity on your forehead or your arm, that is an absolute barrier to ever being saved. You've picked your choice. Well, we know in God's time, please, it's getting close to the end. I thought I would show you something kind of interesting. I think I'm indebted to Clarence Larkin for first observing this. It's interesting that if you take the segments of Israel's history, that if you take the literal period on the calendar, say from the promise to Abraham to the Exodus, it turns out to be 75 plus 430 years. That's 505 years. But during that 505, if you subtract the years that don't count, namely the ones in which Ishmael had suzerainty, which was 15, you get 490 years. You say, well, okay, what's that got to do with anything? Well, if you go from the Exodus to the temple, it was begun in 1 Kings 6, verse 8, and it's completed in, so you got 594 years plus 7, so you get 601. But from that calendar time of 601 years, you subtract the years under the judges when they were under servitude. And there were 6 of those. Under Mesopotamia for 8 years, under the Moabites for 18 years, Canaanites for 20 years, Midianites 7, Ammonites 18, Philistines 40. When you add that up, that's 111 years of servitude. When you take the 601 years on the calendar and pull out the 111 that they're in servitude, you get 490 again. You always take the calendar, take when Israel's out of favor, and what you got left is 490 years. From the temple to the edict of Artaxerxes. Temple was 1005 BC. Nehemiah 2:1 was 445 BC, as we noted earlier. That's 560 years. But you subtract that, out of that 560, the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, you again get 490 years. Now, when you see all this, you remember in the New Testament when they asked Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times? What did he say? 70 times 7. You and I assume that's a figure of speech, and indeed it is. But it's also the period of time that God forgave Israel. The 490 years, then you owe me 70, remember? From Artaxerxes to the first Advent, that was the 69 weeks of Daniel's prophecy, call it 483 years. Then we have a church interval that we don't know how long it is. But whatever it is, the 69 weeks plus the 70th week is 490 years. There's an interval in there again where Israel set aside the church. In this case, they're going to be subtracting something like 2,000 years, some number like that probably. So that's kind of interesting. 70 times 7. Israel, this is what we've just studied is the 4th of 490-year intervals in the history of Israel. One of the big debates, of course, is where is the how does the tribulation fit into all this? We know there's a 70th week that's defined by the Antichrist, that he defined by his enforcing a covenant. In the middle of that, he erects the abomination of desolation, which is the trigger for the Jews to flee, is Jerusalem. From there to the end is Great Tribulation, which ends, of course, is interrupted by the Battle of Armageddon, where Jesus intercedes, his second coming, he sets up the millennium. The question is, where does the rapture take place? There are those that believe the rapture of the church takes place at the end, that the church goes through the tribulation. People who believe that, first of all, usually do not know anything about Daniel chapter 9, because it doesn't fit. There are some that realize that the church does not go through the tribulation. They recognize that the tribulation starts in the middle of the week, so people who hold that view are called mid-trib people. There are some that it's a variation of that called pre-wrath. He uses that term, but Rosenthal has published a popular book in that area, and it's basically a variation of the mid-trib position. And of course, as you probably gathered, most of us hold the view, doesn't mean we're right, but we hold the view that the rapture takes place prior to, not only before the tribulation, before the 70th week of Daniel. And in fact, I want you to notice that it doesn't occur at the beginning of the 70th week. There's an interval, we don't know how long, between the rapture and the beginning of the 70th week. What happens in that interval? The Antichrist can't show up until the rapture takes place. When the Antichrist is revealed, there's an interval of time, it might be 1 day, it might be 30 years, for him to rise to power where he can enforce this covenant. So there's an interval of some kind there. Now, the post-trib people, I'd say many of the denominational churches, have some problems. First of all, they deny the teaching, the New Testament teaching of imminency. All through the New Testament, we're taught to expect him at any moment. That's called imminency. He could come before this meeting's over. He'd come tomorrow morning. We are told to expect him at any moment. That's a doctrine of imminency. If you believe that the rapture doesn't take place till at the end of the tribulation, you've got all kinds of things that have to happen before he can gather us. That's contrary to Scripture. It also, the post-trib view requires the church to be on the earth during the 70th week. Israel and the church are mutually exclusive. Don't take my word for it. Do your own study. But I think you'll discover, if you're diligent, that Israel and the church are dealt with separately. According to post-trib, the church experienced God's wrath. We were promised several places we were promised not to experience his wrath. 1 Thessalonians 5:9, Revelation 3.